Okay, for this assignment, we're going to look at two documents, some excerpts from those documents. We're going to look at the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and then we're going to look at a U.S. Supreme Court ruling dealing with the treaty, or challenging the treaty, if you will. So this is the area that we're talking about. Excuse me, I'm going to kind of turn my head to look at the map every once in a while. So this is the area at the end of 1848, at the end of the war that ended in 1848, the Mexican-American War. This is the territory that the U.S. will gain from Mexico at the end of that war. So you can see all of Texas, part of the panhandle of Oklahoma. We are going into Colorado, Utah, Nevada, California, Arizona, and New Mexico. This is a huge chunk of territory. And this is a huge chunk that had an indigenous population, but also like a Mexican population. So within the confines of this area, what we're going to see now, let me make this bigger so you can actually see the whole wording of the treaty, are some definitions and some legal speak for people living in that area. So Mexicans, because that was the nation that they were under before, Mexicans now established in territories previously belonging to Mexico, and which remain for the future within the limits of the United States, shall be free to continue where they now reside, or to remove at any time to the Mexican Republic, retaining the property which they possess in said territories, or disposing thereof and removing the proceeds wherever they please. Those who shall prefer to remain in the said territories may either retain the title and rights of Mexican citizens, or acquire those of citizens of the United States, but they shall be under the obligation to make their election within 1 year from the date of the exchange of ratifications of this treaty. In the said territories, property of every kind now belonging to Mexicans not established there shall be inviolably respected. Not unavoidably. Inviolably respected. So what that means, basically what they're saying is, you have 1 year from when this treaty is signed to decide, do you want to stay here and become a U.S. citizen, or do you want to go across the border into Mexico? If you do, you're going to give up all your land possessions that's here and now what is called the U.S. But you have a year to decide that. If you do decide to stay here, you will become a U.S. citizen and you'll get to retain all that land. It will become yours. It's basically what that is saying. So there's that explicit promise to retain property, the assurance of becoming a citizen and every right that comes with being a citizen, and strong language is used, right? So a little bit later on, there is an issue, and this treaty is going to be challenged. So a few years later, that challenge is going to come, and I just want you to look at the California Land Act of 1851. So Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, 1848, 49-ish. A few years later, this is California Land Act, 1851. And it says, each and every person claiming lands in California by virtue of any right or title derived from the Spanish or Mexican government shall present the same to the commissioners appointed under this act for examination and decision. All lands, the claims to which shall not have been presented to the said commissioners within 2 years shall be deemed, held, and considered as part of the public domain of the United States. So now what they're doing is they're making landowners must prove ownership of said land rather than ownership just being presumed, like it was under the treaty. Failure to navigate the U.S. legal procedures, that means automatic land loss. And now this burden shifts from the government onto the Mexican residents. So that's what you should notice about this one. Okay, let's move on. There's one more document I want us to look at, and that is this one. This is Botilla versus Dominguez. This came out in 1889. So you'll notice we've jumped kind of far ahead, almost 30-something years into the future. But this is a U.S. Supreme Court decision that ties back to the treaty and to that California Land Act of 1851. No title to land in California dependent upon Spanish or Mexican grants can be of any validity which has not been submitted to and confirmed by the tribunals established by the laws of the United States. The treaty is the supreme law of the land only so far as its provisions are self-executing. What you should notice about this one is U.S. law overrides any treaty protections. Courts decide whether treaty rights actually apply, and legal technicalities defeat international policies. So maybe what you don't realize and what's kind of being left out here is that when we move it to like being part of like you have to maneuver through US legal courts, a lot of times they were done only in English. They would often move the courts so far away that there was no way you could get there, and you wouldn't be told that they had moved your court to a different location until it was too late for you to get there. So they're purposely doing these legal proceedings, but doing them really shady, where there's no way that these former Mexican citizens who are now trying to be legit and become U.S. citizens and hold on to their land, there was no way that they would be able to hold on to that land because the court made it impossible for them to do that. What this court case reflects, though, is kind of what we've been talking about with these borderlands and borderland dynamics. So Mexican residents were treated as legally suspect, right? Spanish and Mexican legal traditions were dismissed as inferior. It doesn't matter if that land was given to you under old Spanish or Mexican rule and law. You now have to navigate through U.S. courts, and we're going to make it almost impossible for you to navigate through it. We're going to stack it against you. And then stereotypes about Mexicans being incapable of managing land also most of the time shaped legal outcomes. When they did make it to court, they sometimes weren't granted the land that was theirs legally because you couldn't take care of it because you're an inferior race. So rather than seeing land loss as accidental or chaotic, what this court case tells us is that it is systematic and state sanctioned. So the Treaty of Guadalupe, it does promise protection, but U.S. courts decided how and whether those promises actually mattered. Land was not taken despite the law. What ends up is land was taken through the law. They used the law in order to make sure that that land ownership went from Mexican landowners to white landowners. And that's what we're going to look at with this assignment that you're going to do. So for this assignment, what you're going to look at is like kind of doing a side-by-side comparison, right? And I want you to fill these in the assignment itself. But think about with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, who created the document? You know when it was written, but type that in, type in the year. What was the purpose of the document? Who was the intended audience and whose interest does this document primarily serve? It is okay. I want you to try to answer these on your own. It is okay to search them and to find the answers though, right? Don't just copy and paste though. Put those answers into your own words when you do these searches. And then for the court case of 1889, Bottilla versus Dominguez, I want you to do the same. Like who wrote the document? What year was it written? What was the purpose of it? The intended audience, and whose interest does it serve? I want you to, for both documents, fill that part in on the assignment. Then I also want you to answer these two questions. So why might the United States have chosen to handle land claims through courts rather than just honoring them? And how do ideas from the Black legend or stereotypes about Mexicans appear in how the law is applied? Again, this may take some Google searching, some internet searching for you to find these answers, but I want you, whatever answers you find, I want you to really think about it and then explain those answers in your own words. Don't just copy and paste from the internet. You'll get in trouble and you'll get caught doing that. So it's fine to use that as like a starting point, but then you interpret that and tell me why you think the United States chose to handle land claims and how did those Black legends apply.